We're about to unravel the eerie final moments of the most notorious killers and spilling the details on their last words, their demeanor, right before execution, and unique details of their case. Even their last meal choices made right before they face justice. But before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you never miss out on our quest for justice. I'm Linda with It's a Crime, so now let's get into it. In the dark world of true crime, executions serve as a chilling end to the horrific stories of these notorious killers. These haunting moments, marked by their final words, offer a unique glimpse into the minds of those who once unleashed terror on the world. In exploring their last words, we'll be reminded of the victims who suffered at their killers' hands and the lives of loved ones forever changed by these heinous acts. Let's dive into 5 specific infamous killers, shedding light on their execution day and the days surrounding it. First up, killer number 1, Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was a notorious American serial killer who committed a series of gruesome crimes during the 1970s. He was known for his charming and charismatic demeanor, which he used to gain the trust of his victims. His modus operandi, also known as MO, typically involved approaching young women, often pretending to be injured or in need of assistance, before violently attacking and murdering them. Bundy was responsible for the deaths of at least 30 young women, although the exact number may be higher. The total number of his victims is unknown, but it's estimated to run above 100. His crimes spanned multiple states, including Washington, Oregon, Utah, and Colorado. His ability to blend into society and manipulate those around him allowed him to evade capture for a significant period. He was eventually apprehended, tried, and convicted in 1979. Now, what was unique about the case is he evaded justice. Bundy had an exceptional knack for evading justice, pulling off daring escapes, and leaving authorities baffled. The standout escape was in 1977 when he broke out of a Colorado jail and made his way to Florida. This was the second escape in the same year. Now, it was reported he intentionally lost weight so he could slip through a small grate in the ceiling of his cell. He lined up law books and pillows to make it look like he was in his bed. It was like a scene from a movie. The first escape involved a courthouse window jump at the Pitkin County Courthouse from the law library, and he wasn't caught until days later. Now, according to Bundy, he said he was just sick of being locked up. He saw an open window and said, "I'm ready to go." It took 10 minutes to realize that he was gone.
Bundy jumped out of this second-story window at the front of the Pitkin County Courthouse this morning. He was scheduled for a court appearance and apparently had been locked into the law library by sheriff's deputies while attorneys were arguing a motion to strike the death penalty. Witnesses say he left in a hurry. However, nobody saw him open the window, and he escaped clean in an unknown direction. At both ends of town, the Sheriff's Department put up roadblocks and searched each vehicle leaving the town of Aspen. As of late this afternoon, Bundy was still missing, but a court clerk said they'd arrested 9 people on warrants and confiscated 200 pounds of marijuana. All day long, County Sheriff Dick Keenest has been circling over the wooded hills in a helicopter looking for the suspected rapist killer, but with no success. Ted Bundy, a Washington state resident, was convicted last year of the kidnap assault of a young woman from Salt Lake City. He's also the prime suspect in a series of murders of young women in Washington state, as well as the suspect in a murder case here in Aspen. This is Ward Lucas reporting from Aspen.
Another unique aspect is Bundy represented himself during parts of his trial, showcasing his intelligence and legal acumen, so much so that the judge took notice. By representing himself, he was able to manipulate the court proceedings and gain advantages in presenting his defense. In his sentencing hearing in 1979, the judge addressed him as he awaited his sentence for the brutal murders he committed. The judge delivered the surprising following words.
Take care of yourself, young man.
Thank you.
I say that to you sincerely. Take care of yourself. It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. You made a good lawyer. I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner.
Possibly one of the most intriguing facts is the fact that Ted Bundy worked at Seattle's Suicide Hotline Crisis Center while studying psychology at the University of Washington. Yeah, he actually supposedly helped people, and at one of his attempts to lure women, which failed, he mentioned his name was Ted. Serial killer Ted Bundy was also added to the FBI's top 10 fugitive list on February 10th, 1978. Now, Bundy was initially scheduled to be executed for March of 1986, but it was postponed multiple times due to appeals. Finally, on January 24th, 1989, the infamous electric chair, also known as Old Sparky, at the Florida State Prison marked the end of Bundy's reign of terror. His case remains one of the most infamous in American crime history. And in the days leading up to his execution, Bundy granted interviews to journalists, providing glimpses into the depths of his crimes and psychology. These interviews became integral to the media coverage and the extensive examination of Bundy's psyche.
You are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock if you don't receive another stay. What is going through your mind? What thoughts have you had in these last few days?
I won't kid you to say that it's something that I feel that I am in control of, or something that I've come to terms with, because I haven't. It's a moment-by-moment thing. Sometimes I feel very tranquil, and other times I don't feel tranquil at all. What's going through my mind right now is to use the minutes and hours that I have left as fruitfully as possible and see what happens. It helps to live in the moment, in the essence that we use it productively. So right now I'm feeling calm, and in large part because I'm here with you.
For the record, you are guilty of killing many women and girls.
Yes. Yes, that's true.
Ted, how did it happen? Take me back. What are the antecedents of the behavior that we've seen? So much grief, so much sorrow, so much pain for so many people. Where did it start? How did this moment come about?
That's the question of the hour, and one that not only people much more intelligent than I have been working on for years, but one that I've been working on for years and trying to understand. Is there enough time to explain it all? I don't know. I think I understand it, though. Understand what happened to me, to the extent that I can see how certain feelings and ideas developed in me to the point where I began to act out on them. Certain very violent and very destructive feelings.
Let's go back then to those roots. First of all, you, as I understand it, were raised in what you consider to have been a healthy home.
Absolutely.
You were not physically abused. You were not sexually abused. You were not emotionally abused.
No way. And that's part of the tragedy of this whole situation, is because I grew up in a wonderful home with two dedicated and loving parents, one of 5 brothers and sisters. A home where we as children were the focus of my parents' lives, where we regularly attended church, 2 Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. I'm not saying this was Leave It to Beaver.
It wasn't a perfect home.
No, I don't know that such a home exists, but it was a fine, solid Christian home, and nobody, I hope no one will try to take the easy way out and to try to blame or otherwise accuse my family of contributing to this, because I know, and I'm trying to tell you as honestly as I know how, what happened, and I think this is a message I want to get across.
Do you deserve the punishment the state has inflicted upon you?
That's a very good question. And I'll answer very, very honestly. I don't want to die. I'm not going to kid you. I'll kid you not. I deserve certainly the most extreme punishment society has, and I think society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me. That's for sure. I think what I hope will come of our discussion is I think society deserves to be protected from itself, because as we've been talking, there are forces at loose in this country, particularly again this kind of violent pornography, where on the one hand, well-meaning, decent people will condemn behavior of a Ted Bundy while they're walking past a magazine rack full of the very kinds of things that send young kids down the road to be Ted Bundys. That's the irony. We're talking here not just about more. What I'm talking about is going beyond retribution, which is what people want with me, going beyond retribution and punishment, because there is no way in the world that killing me is going to restore those beautiful children to their parents and correct and soothe the pain. But I'll tell you, there are lots of other kids playing in streets around this country today who are going to be dead tomorrow and the next day and the next day and next month, because other young people are reading the kinds of things and seeing the kinds of things that are available in the media today.
Ted, as you would imagine, there's tremendous cynicism about you on the outside, and I suppose for good reason. I'm not sure that there's anything that you could say that people would believe. Some people would believe.
Yeah.
And yet, you told me last night, and I have heard this through our mutual friend John Tanner, that you have accepted the forgiveness of Jesus Christ and are a follower and a believer in him. Do you draw strength from that as you approach these final hours?
I do. I can't say that
it's going to be
being in the valley of the shadow of death is something that I've become all that accustomed to, and that I'm strong and nothing's bothering me. Listen, it's no fun. It gets kind of lonely, and yet I have to remind myself that every one of us will go through this someday in one way or another, and countless millions who have walked this earth before us have. So this is just an experience which we all share. And
yeah,
right on.
Now, on his last night alive, Bundy called his mother twice, and as hundreds set up camp outside to drink beer and howl chants for the killer to burn and bang pans together in a feverish hurrah, it was time for his last meal. But Bundy wasn't interested and refused to choose. Still, he was served the standard fare of steak, eggs, hash browns, and toast, but he didn't eat it. And Ted Bundy was said to be calm and composed on the day of his execution and continued to pray and read his Bible. Witnesses reported that he exhibited no signs of fear or anxiety as he approached Old Sparky, but other witnesses say when he walked into the death chamber, he looked white as a ghost. But he reportedly chatted it up with the prison chaplain and expressed that he was at peace with his impending death. 42 witnesses were crammed in the Florida State Prison to witness his execution. Included in the list were the media, as well as family members of his victims. A large frenzied crowd gathered outside of the prison that day. That morning, at least 500 people showed up. Some celebrated his death with protest signs of "Burn, Bundy, burn," and hundreds of people chanting. The Florida State Fraternity celebrated his last day with a sign painted on the wall saying, "Watch Ted fry, see Ted die." And they even had a cookout serving Bundy burgers and what they called electrified hot dogs. Some held vigils or protested against the death penalty, but even a sandwich shop down the road had a sign saying, "Tuesday is Friday." Now, as the electric chair was prepared for his last moments, it was reported Bundy peered through a plexiglass window looking at the witnesses who faced him and uttered, "It's all right." Was he soothing himself with those words? And on January 24th, 1989, at 7:05 a.m., Ted Bundy, age 42, was asked if he had any final words. He looked at his attorney and pastor and said, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." 4 prison officials tightened thick leather straps around his legs, arms, waist, and chest. The last strap was fastened across Bundy's mouth and chin, and the metal skull cap was bolted in place with the heavy black veil attached, falling in front of the serial killer's face. He took his last breaths, and 2,000 volts surged through the wires. At 7:16 a.m., Theodore Robert Bundy was pronounced dead by paramedics. And according to my research, even fireworks went off after the announcement of his execution.
Ted Bundy, even in death, stirred hatred. An unprecedented crowd of hundreds started gathering before dawn. It took on a macabre circus-like atmosphere. Is this what you expected to find when you come out here? Folks dancing and singing?
Yeah, why not?
But a handful of anti-death penalty protesters.
It sounds more like vengeance to me than justice.
At one point, the celebration got out of hand. One man was arrested for shooting off fireworks. Until the very last moment, no one could be sure Bundy didn't have a last trick up his sleeve, a legal technicality. But in the death chamber, Bundy was uttering his final words.
All he said is, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." That was Ted Bundy's last statement.
His eyes looked like he was almost a child, and his mother caught him doing something wrong. It was a combination of just being sorry and knowing that it was the end. It was the end of the line.
So it ended for Ted Bundy. 10 years, 28 confessions, millions in Florida's legal battle to end his life. Warren Ellie, Pulse 13, Florida State Prison.
Now, what's notable post-execution is researchers studied his brain, hoping it would give answers to his extremely violent behavior. According to researchers, there are links to criminality and certain brain injuries. But despite Bundy's claims to a detective of these urges to kill and SA his victims, even saying it was like a chemical tidal wave washing through his brain, and even compared the feeling to being addicted to drugs. But despite that, no evidence of injuries or the like were found in the examination of his brain. He was cremated and had requested that his ashes be scattered in Washington's Cascade Mountains, which hauntingly happened to be the same mountains he used to dump at least 4 of his victims. Several documentaries and series and books have been produced to explore the life crimes and the enduring mystery of Ted Bundy. The release of Netflix's 4-part series Conversations with the Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, and biopic Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, which featured Hollywood heartthrob Zac Efron as the turtleneck-wearing sociopath, proved that no murderer has captured the world's attention like Bundy. And there was another one called Ted Bundy, American Boogeyman, which was released in 2021 on Prime Video. I'll have all the links for you in the description box below this video. The book, The Stranger Beside Me, The Inside Story of Serial Killer Ted Bundy, says that Anne Rule was a writer working on the biggest story of her life, tracking down a brutal mass murder. Little did she know that the young man who was her close friend was the savage slayer she was hunting.
Yeah, for sure. I've already qualified for the 3rd degree. Oh, come on, guys. Yeah, I know more about my class is graduating in about a month. Alright. In law school? I'll bet you I know more about law than any of them.
How does it make you feel when they're graduating?
That pisses me off. Now that does piss me off.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Chad, take care.
Okay, later.
Number 2 is Eileen Wuornos, aka the Damsel of Death. Eileen Wuornos is one of America's most notorious female serial killers who murdered 7 men between 1989 and 1990. Her crimes were committed in Florida, and she became one of the most infamous female serial killers in history. Eileen was a sex worker, and her victims were primarily her clients. She would lure them under the pretense of providing her special services before fatally shooting them. She claimed that she killed these men in self-defense during attempted SAs, but evidence suggested otherwise. Eileen was convicted and sentenced to death for 6 out of the 7 murders. Now, what was unique about the case was the execution of a female serial killer is relatively rare, making her case notable in the context of criminal justice history. She was sentenced to the death for the murders of the 6 of the 7 men. In the case of the 7th victim, no charges were ever brought as his body was never found. However, Wuornos's palm print was found on the interior door handle of his car. She was very feisty also in court and made outbursts and even flipped the judge and the court off.
I sentence you to death for the murder of David Spears.
Thank you. And probably see, I'll be up in heaven while y'all are rotting in hell.
You will handle that.
In the ass one of these days.
Okay, there will be an automatic appeal. You have the right to an appeal. Mr. Glazer, is that going to be handled by you
May
or the
your
public
wife and
defender?
kids get
I would ask that you would
right
appoint the
in the
public defender's
ass.
office.
Okay,
to handle the appeal.
I'll appoint the public defender's office to handle the appeal. There's one other thing that I want to say that I think needs to be said.
I know I was you weren't nothing but a bunch of scum.
Therefore, these proceedings are now
Putting
completed.
somebody who was to death, motherfucker.
And in an interesting twist, Wuornos chose to waive her appeals and expressed her desire for a quick execution. And a year before she was executed, in a petition to the Florida Supreme Court, she wrote it was her intention to dismiss her legal team and cancel all pending appeals. She said, "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing this she's crazy stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again." And her attorneys argued that she's not mentally competent to make that request, but she insisted that she did know what she was doing, and court-appointed psychiatrists agreed. Eileen was executed by lethal injection on October 9th, 2022 at the Florida State Prison. She gave a series of interviews in the weeks leading up to it. She talked about, and I quote, being taken away to meet God and Jesus and the angels and whatever is beyond the beyond. Her final on-camera words were, "Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass."
I'm leaving. I'm glad. Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass. Okay, let's go.
As for her last meal choice, Eileen decided against having her final meal, even though she could have anything she wanted for under $20, but instead she requested a single cup of black coffee. Her demeanor was said to be calm and composed on the day of her execution. Witnesses reported that she seemed at peace with her impending death, but also observed that she appeared surprised to see so many people there. A prison guard wrote notes about the experience and said that Eileen seemed to be excited to move on from this world. He wrote, "Wuornos is very angry at the media and corrupt institutions and says she can't wait until Wednesday at 9:30, the day of her execution, so that she can be with her God and punish all the evildoers for the way they treated her." The day before her execution, she gave an interview and talked about the upcoming day.
I'm okay. I'm okay. God is going to be there. Jesus Christ is going to be there. All the angels and everything. And, you know, whatever's on the beyond. I think it's going to be more like Star Trek, beaming me up into a space vehicle, man. Then I move on, recolonize to another planet or whatever. But it's whatever's the beyond. I know it's going to be good because I didn't do anything as wrong as they said. I did the right thing. And I saved a lot of people's butts from getting hurt and killed too.
So are you saying that you killed in self-defense or in cold blood? What do you, because you've changed your story. I'm just trying to
What are you talking about? Change story on what?
No, about whether it was self-defense or not.
I'm not going to say it, you know, I'm not going to get in depth about my cases, Nick. I'm on my way to the chamber, nothing stopping it. You can believe it or you don't have to believe it. That's up to you, man. Put a big question mark on your film.
Now, there were 29 people there that day of her execution, including 6 relatives of Eileen's victims, 12 journalists, a state prosecutor, and various Department of Corrections officers. There was a widespread agreement regarding Eileen's demeanor, with many describing her as off her rocker or totally off the wall. One person working on a documentary about her noted that she exhibited a different persona in each interview. As for her last words, which really raised some eyebrows and made odd references to movies and religion, when asked if she had any final words, she said yes. I would just like to say I'm sailing with the rock and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6, like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back. I'll be back. Now, note, July 4th is Independence Day. June 6th, however, is D-Day, and Independence Day in Sweden is celebrated annually on June 6th. Let me know your thoughts below. Now, when she was executed, Eileen Wuornos was strapped down completely, unable to move except for her head. A brown curtain was drawn back, and according to witnesses, she turned to them, made an odd face, and kind of smiled, rolled her eyes, and turned away. She died by lethal injection. She closed her eyes, her head jerked backward, and as her mouth dropped open, her eyes were said to have slightly opened and appeared that she was gone. Eileen's official time of death was at 9:47 a.m. at 46 years old. It was said it took 17 minutes in total. She was the second woman in Florida to be executed and the 10th in the United States. Now, notable, after her execution, Eileen was cremated. Her ashes were scattered in Michigan under a tree by her childhood friend. Eileen's former defense attorney said that she was the most mentally unstable person that he has ever represented, and a documentary filmmaker about Eileen said that they are executing someone who is mad. At Wuornos' request, the song Carnival by Natalie Merchant played at her funeral. Natalie Merchant was previously the lead singer of the band 10,000 Maniacs before she launched her solo career. Carnival touches on themes of life's transient nature, the passage of time, and the complexities of human existence. The carnival imagery is often interpreted as a metaphor for the unpredictability and cyclical nature of life. Eileen listened to this album for many hours while on death row. When Natalie Merchant found out that she listened to this, she gave permission for the use of the song in the closing credits of the documentary made by Nick Broomfield in Eileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer. Wuornos spoke about her crimes in that Broomfield documentary and in another one called Eileen Wuornos, The Selling of a Serial Killer. You may remember her story also in the movie called Monster, featuring Charlize Theron, who portrayed Wuornos and won an Academy Award for her performance.
I have made peace with my Lord, and I have asked forgiveness. I am sorry that my acts of self-defense ended up in court like this, but I take full responsibility for my actions. It was them or me. I am sorry for all the pain that my actions have caused. I am prepared to die if you say it is necessary.
Number 3, John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown, or Patches or Pogo the Clown. John Wayne Gacy was an American serial killer and sex offender who gained notoriety for his heinous crimes in the 1970s. Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown, lured and murdered at least 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978 in the Chicago area. Gacy's modus operandi, or MO, involved posing as a community figure and children's entertainer, performing as Pogo the Clown at parties and events. He would then lure his victims, both men and boys, to his home under various pretenses, where he subjected them to SA and ultimately murdered them. Gacy often buried his victims in the crawl space beneath his house. He was convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to death. What was unique about his case was his clown persona. He would perform at kids' parties as Pogo the Clown, and his victims were found buried in the crawl space under his house. Authorities discovered 29 bodies there, and with the rest of them, he would just dump them in the river when he ran out of space. Now, during interviews, he claimed he was innocent.
If you want to charge me with anything, charged me with complicity in 2 of the murders.
Just 2?
That's all I know about.
That's his story, that he didn't kill anyone. Just an accomplice, he says, and that he helped dispose of 2. One of them, Robert Peast, who was 15 years old when he went to the house on Summerdale. Gacy owned a construction company and invited young Peast to apply for a job.
Robert Peast was killed by another individual in my home.
How did he get to your home?
He was transported to the house by another.
How did the other, whoever he was, kill Robert Peast?
I believe he was strangled.
You were there, right?
Not during the crime, but I was there afterwards, and I watched the removal of the body.
And what happened to the body afterwards? Was one that was, that
It
body was put
river.
into the
It was
river?
taken to the river and dumped in the river.
Did you help do that?
Yes, I'm in complicity with that. I've always contended. Don't look at me as an innocent babe of the woods.
Not for a second would I look at John Gacy as a babe in the woods. He may be admitting now only to being an accomplice, but 13 years ago when he was arrested, he confessed to almost everything. You have all the bodies, Gacy said, and there was even a killer map showing where 27 youths were buried. And in fact, he led police to his garage and sprayed orange paint on the concrete to mark the spot precisely where a body was found.
No.
Now he says he was simply marking a spot where some new concrete had been poured.
In regards to going out into the garage, yes, I know I went to the house, and yes, I know I walked in the garage, and they asked me where the last section of concrete was poured. Okay. I said, there's the last section where the last section of concrete was poured. Okay. They are the ones that took the orange can of paint and said, here, put a mark there. So I put an X there.
So the paint was not to identify the place of burial?
No, it never was. They asked me.
But according to authorities who were with Gacy that morning, he made more than just an X on the floor.
He sprayed a stick figure with the orange spray can in the garage. Not just a mark, a stick figure showing the orientation of the body. Right underneath that stick figure, exactly where he drew it, pointed in the direction he drew it, was the body of John Butkovich.
Yep. And then there's the Gacy confession about how he killed his victims. Strangled them with his now infamous rope trick that police say he demonstrated to them with a rosary bead. He says he was simply discussing knots in general. Catch his sense of humor.
Shoelaces, huh? You're in trouble now.
Yeah, right.
Aren't you afraid sitting that close to me? What the hell? Oh, this is too long. You don't need it this long. Okay. I had a rosary, which I carried in my pocket. I've always carried a rosary. It was my communion rosary. They said, well, what kind of a knot do you use? I said, what do you mean knot? When I tie things up? I says, depending on what I'm using it for, I said, the only thing I ever learned from Boy Scouts is a tourniquet knot. He said, well, show us what that is. So I took, at that time, and again, it's together, but in order to demonstrate it here, I took the rosary and I said, well, here, you put it around. This is hard trying to do this. Why don't you put your hand out? Okay, here. What I told him, I said, here, all you do is you wrap it around, you put one knot in it. And I said, then you put a second knot in it. Okay? I said, then you take a stick and stick it in here, and you just turn this. And I says, it causes a tourniquet. I said, that's the only knot I ever learned.
Precisely the kind of knot found on the ropes wrapped around the necks of the victims found under the house on Summerdale. And there was other compelling evidence, including wallets and rings of the victims found in Gacy's home, that leave no doubt whatever he was the killer. But what is it that made him do what he did? A look at the mind of a serial killer tomorrow. Linda and Bill.
Walter, thank you.
He was once also photographed with former First Lady Rosalind in 1978. Gacy was affiliated with the Democratic Party in Chicago and was in charge of a major parade. It was said that it was an embarrassment to the Secret Service after Gacy was caught. He also, while on death row, he created paintings and artwork, some of which were sold to collectors. But the state of Illinois sued Gacy for the money he made from his various revenue streams, such as his artwork, including self-portraits as Pogo the Clown. And he also had a 900 number in prison where the paying caller would hear Gacy argue his innocence. And according to the state, Gacy was fiscally responsible for covering his incarceration, but Gacy wanted to leave his earnings for his family. He also logged his time in jail every single day of what he did that day in a book. And Gacy was described as an amusing character. He was said to have had a pen pal who was in love with him, and he was asked, "Hey, John, are you going to marry this woman?" He replied, "No way. That woman has 3 children, and they're all in the penitentiary. You think I'm going to marry into a family like that?" Interesting. And in interviews, he'd lie and say that he wasn't guilty of these heinous crimes, yet would do and say interesting things on camera that would allude to his guilt. On May 10th, John Wayne Gacy was executed at the age of 52 by lethal injection at the Stateville Penitentiary in Crest Hill, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. It was the first execution in the state in almost 30 years. Now, his last meal was reportedly a lot of food. Having previously owned KFC stores in the 60s, John Gacy ordered a bucket of original recipe KFC chicken, a dozen fried shrimp, French fries, a pound of fresh strawberries, and washed it down with a bottle of Diet Coke. The specific items and their quantity certainly stood out compared to the more standard last meal requests. It was also reported that he was allowed to have a private picnic on the prison grounds surrounded by his family, although it's unknown who actually joined him for the meal that day. And in the last hours leading up to his execution, John Gacy spent his time creating paintings. In the calm and composed moments leading up to his execution by lethal injection, witnesses observed John Wayne Gacy as unemotional and stoic. But he's described as chatty by a Stateville prison spokesman during his last day. Gacy engaged in easy small talk, discussing topics such as the prospects of the Chicago Cubs, among other things. Even in the hours before his death, Gacy, according to prison staff, appeared pleasant and focused on socializing with those visiting him for the last time. He didn't want to talk about the moments to come. He maintained his innocence throughout the years, but later admitted to the crimes but didn't show remorse. Now, members of the media, legal representatives, and family members of John Wayne Gacy's victims attended his execution. Despite a small number of anti-capital punishment protesters, Gacy reiterated to his lawyers that his death wouldn't compensate for the 33 lives lost, emphasizing that he considered himself being murdered by the state. And the atmosphere surrounding the execution was mixed. While Gacy's neighbors, who had lived near him for years, expressed emotional trauma and adoration for him, there was also an unexpected outpouring of support from many who wouldn't openly admit it publicly. On the legal side, prosecutors who had worked on the case celebrated with a pre-execution dinner featuring barbecue. The chief deputy who tried the case attended the dinner and later commented on seeking the death penalty, stating that any prosecutor advocating for it should have the courage to witness the execution to ensure the job was done. He said, "I asked for the invitation to the execution. I think any prosecutor who seeks the death penalty should have the guts to be there and see it. And I wanted to be sure he was dead as a personal matter." Outside the prison, a crowd gathered to both cheer and protest Gacy's death.
Death penalty demonstrators at the prison who favored the execution far outnumbered the candle-carrying death penalty opponents.
No, he did horrible things. The things he did were truly evil, but that does not give us the right to take his life.
Gacy's long-awaited execution here in Joliet is not expected to trigger a wave of other executions in Illinois. Only 4 condemned inmates have been on death row longer than Gacy, and their cases are tangled in a web of legal appeals. 150 others are waiting in line behind him.
However, among those who visited Gacy in his final hours, the prevailing mood was somber, marked by the emotional trauma experienced by those who loved him and the surprising support from individuals who, despite their sentiments, kept their sympathies private. 3 notable words marked his very last words, emphasizing his refusal to accept responsibility for his heinous crimes. The 3 words, "Kiss my ass." And on May 10th, 1994, just after midnight, John Wayne Gacy received a 3-drug lethal injection. However, Complications arose when a clog in the IV line caused a delay in administering the second drug. The lethal cocktail included a sedative to induce sleep, a muscle-paralyzing chemical, and potassium chloride to stop the heart. Following the clog during the initial injection, the execution team drew the blinds, replaced the clogged tube, and resumed the process after an 18-minute delay. Anesthesiologists attributed the issue to the inexperience of prison officials, suggesting that the adherence to proper procedures could have prevented the error. Gacy was officially pronounced dead at 12:58 a.m., and the prosecutor stated he got a much easier death than any of his victims.
He got a much easier death than any of his victims. In my opinion, he got an easier death than he deserved.
Now, something that's notable, in October 2011, Cook County Sheriff Thomas Dart launched a renewed effort to identify John Wayne Gacy's unidentified victims. Full DNA profiles were obtained from each victim, and investigators sought DNA samples from individuals across the U.S. with male relatives missing between 1970 and 1979. The testing resulted in confirming the identities of 3 victims, ruling out several missing youths as Gacy's victims, and successfully solving 4 unrelated cold cases from 1972 to 1979. Notably, on the same day, serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer was baptized in the Wisconsin prison where he was serving 15 consecutive life sentences. One of the latest series that featured John Wayne Gacy is called Conversations with a Killer, the John Wayne Gacy tapes on Netflix. And it says a new Netflix series uses never heard before audio recordings from the interrogation of serial killer John Wayne Gacy to shed light on his mindset. Conversations with a Killer, the John Wayne Gacy tapes, is the second installment in an ongoing project from filmmaker Joe Berlinger. The first was built around similar recordings of Ted Bundy.
If they want to be convinced or brainwashed into what they believe, then fine, then go ahead and kill me. But vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, because you will have executed somebody that didn't commit the crime.
Number 4, Daniel Rolling, aka the Gainesville Ripper. Daniel Harold Rolling, also known as the Gainesville Ripper, was an American serial killer who committed a series of gruesome murders in the span of 4 days in Gainesville, Florida in 1990. His crimes terrorized the college town, leading to widespread fear among the community. He brutally killed 5 young college students with a hunting knife in their own home. He also previously killed 3 people in Shreveport, Louisiana, but was put on death row for the Florida murders.
We, the jury, as to the count 1 of the indictment, the first-degree murder of Christina Powell, recommend to the court that it impose the death penalty upon Danny Harold Rolling.
What was unique about the case was Daniel Rolling claimed his motive was to be a superstar like Ted Bundy and blamed his actions on an evil alter ego named Gemini, which he allegedly borrowed from the movie The Exorcist.
While Danny was here, he told you that he went to see the movie The Exorcist Part 3, didn't he?
Yes.
He says he's the Gemini killer.
Danny Rolling never told you that the name of the possessed killer was Gemini, did he?
No.
Danny Rolling never told you when one of the people was trying to communicate, they're trying to figure out what language it is. They figured out it really was just English, but it was backwards.
It's very common.
Okay. The exact thing he did with Enad.
Yeah.
He also cleverly added another alter ego named Enad, which just so happens to be Danny spelled backwards. He also left evidence behind in the Shreveport murders, and while investigating, the authorities were able to determine the killer's blood type, which made it easier to narrow down the suspects and match Rolling's blood to the 3 victims in Louisiana. Interestingly, Rolling was a police officer's son from Shreveport. And in 1997, Daniel sent a detailed confession to a woman he had married while in prison, which included the description of the crime scene. She, in turn, gave it to police. And in 2008, over 2,000 pieces of evidence was burned and destroyed in an effort to not have the items sold to collectors or end up on eBay. A really odd fact in the case is Daniel Rowling empathized that humans are nothing more than a higher order of animals, saying they are just a little smarter than other mammals. He wrote that humans harvest mammals such as deer and eat them, so serial killers are simply harvesting humans, who are also mammals. He said that big game hunters were also serial killers because they killed one animal after another, month after month, year after year, and that these hunters were proud of their serial killing of other mammals. And that this was no different, he said, from the pride and pattern of a serial killer killing humans month after month, year after year. He also said that the societal shock over serial killers was hypocritical, as those who were condemning such acts likely sat around the table, he said, talking about it while consuming animal flesh regularly, including close relatives to humans like pigs. He suggested that many serial killers should only be convicted for hunting humans out of season, comparing it to the established hunting seasons for other mammals. Now note, so the question is, when would in season be of hunting humans, and when is out of season? The time of his trial, Danny Rowling was already serving 4 life terms for robbery and burglary. Add to that the murders in Florida. And after the murders in Shreveport, however, authorities found a campsite, and they found a recording of a man talking and singing on it, but they never played the tape that was in evidence for quite some time. The song, titled Mystery Rider, had some very interesting lyrics in it, talking about a killer who went insane.
Mystery Rider, what's your name? You're a killer, a drifter gone insane.
The man on the tape also talked about his life, his family, and how he had wandered down the wrong road. He also talked about the best way to effectively kill a deer.
Aim for the lungs, straight through the rib cage. Either there or the heart, but the best thing to do is hit the lungs.
And to top it off, he signed off with his own name, Danny Harold Rowling.
This man, Danny Harold Rowling.
Now, while they were investigating, they also found a screwdriver at the campsite, which authorities believed that was what he used to pry open the door in the Florida murders. And shortly after the Shreveport killings happened, his singing didn't stop there. In an interesting twist, Daniel wanted a woman to write and tell his story. And this woman would go on and take the spotlight in this case with the media, saying that she has had a physiological response when she first met him in person and fell in love with him.
I was brought into the prison and introduced to Danny behind glass. All of a sudden, I found myself responding to him in a physical way. And I was not prepared for that. Have your ears ever turned red?
Danny Rowling made your ears burn.
It's a physiological response, and this is why I had to admit that I love him.
And in court, he serenaded her without stopping.
Give Mr. Rowling an opportunity to have a say. You have anything you want to say, Mr. Rowling? Well, sir.
If it please the court, could I address the court?
Sure, say whatever you want to say.
Thank you. And, I recall the day I first saw you. I reached out to say I love you, but it was hard to say. I couldn't touch you. So tell me, baby, what were my words? All my tears run together.
Excuse me, Mr. Rowling.
Down the path you choose to follow.
Mr. Rowling.
So tell me, baby, what were my words? All my tears run together. What were my words? All my tears run together, baby, just like rain.
On October 25, 2006, Danny Rowling was executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison. This marked Florida's most high-profile execution since the state put serial killer Ted Bundy to death in 1989. And this was precisely the same place where Bundy was in fact executed. And Rowling stated previously he wanted to be a superstar just like Bundy. Now, Rowling's final meal of his life included lobster tail, butterfly shrimp, baked potato, strawberry cheesecake, and sweet tea. Prisoners were able to choose any meal costing $40 or less, provided that the food and non-alcoholic drink are available at the prison, according to the department rules. After his meal, he spent time with the Reverend, who spoke to him through the bars of his cell. Rolling did an interview with the Associated Press before his impending execution and said, "I do deserve to die, but do I want to die? No, I want to live. Life is difficult to give up." And in his last hours leading up to his execution, Daniel seemed to maintain a calm and cooperative demeanor. Inmates on death row are offered medication to relax before their execution, but Rolling refused any drug. That day and in the hours leading up to his death, Rolling spent time with his brother Kevin and a minister from Kevin's church. The visit allowed physical contact during the final hour. And on that day of execution, approximately 150 people congregated in the field across from Florida State Prison. Anti-death penalty protesters, slightly outnumbering supporters, engaged in peaceful demonstrations, singing religious hymns and ringing a bell in protest. Those against the death penalty expressed their opposition to the impending execution. The atmosphere outside the prison, situated against a stark cow pasture, evoked memories of similar scenes during Ted Bundy's execution on January 24, 1989. The gathering reflected the divided sentiments within the community regarding capital punishment and the events unfolding that day. And the witness gallery was filled with 47 people, including relatives of his victims. All 5 rows were occupied, prompting the need for an extra row of seats to accommodate the witnesses. According to statements from the witnesses, some of the relatives of the victims were seen holding photos of their loved ones or wore pins with their pictures. Prior to his execution, Rolling wrote a 1-page confession letter about the Shreveport murders, and part of it read, "I and I alone am guilty. It was my hand that took those precious lights out of this old dark world. With all my heart and soul, could I bring them back. Being a native son of Shreveport, I can only offer this confession of deep felt remorse over the loss of such fine, outstanding souls. Have wept an ocean of tears by which mournful doth float upon a sea of regret." In total, Rolling confessed to killing 8 people. But in the moments leading up to his execution, Danny chose to sing a gospel hymn as his final words. The hymn lasted for 2 whole minutes, with Rolling passionately singing 5 verses, such as, "He who flung the stars into the heavens, above created the oceans, mountains, eagles, and doves, none greater than thee, O Lord, none greater than thee." Notably, the 2-minute song did not contain any references to the murders. As the hymn echoed in the room, family members of the victims remained somber, with some putting their arms around each other and exhibiting signs of sadness. And according to the chief assistant state attorney who was there and witnessed the execution and the singing, said, "It looked like a final stage performance." Daniel Harold Rolling, aged 52, was pronounced dead by a prison official at 6:13 p.m., more than 16 years after his brutal killing spree that marked the beginning of the University of Florida's fall semester. His execution took place in the same death chamber where Ted Bundy met his end. Daniel Rolling became the 63rd inmate to be put to death since Florida resumed executions in 1979, and he was the 3rd that year. He is buried at the Florida Prison Cemetery. The aftermath of Rolling's execution saw supporters applauding and lighting cigars, celebrating it as the delivery of justice. Beyond the prison walls, a mixed atmosphere prevailed. Supporters believed that justice was finally served, while others formed a circle singing Amazing Grace after he was pronounced dead. Locals viewed the execution as long overdue, asserting that Rolling deserved it. And the event stirred debates on capital punishment, criticizing the attention given to the psychopathic killer. However, the victims' families expressed gratitude in a newspaper ad aiming to transform a blemish into society into a symbol of community resilience. At the state's attorney office hangs photos of the victims on the wall, and the former state attorney said he makes it a point to look at them when he visits his old workplace. There have been several works created about this brutal serial killer. The most notable was the 1994 film Scream, which was a loose inspiration for the slasher horror film. At the time of Rolling's trial, the screenwriter tuned into a TV special about the Gainesville Ripper. As he watched the program, he became aware of an open window in the Los Angeles home he was house sitting. Feeling a surge of paranoia, Williamson imagined the possibility of a knife-wielding assailant observing him from outside. And these ideas and fears inspired him to craft a screenplay, which he successfully sold for $400,000, giving rise to the movie Scream.
I've been running from first one thing and then another all my life. But there are some things that you just can't run from, and this being one of those.
Number 5, Gary Gilmore. Gary Gilmore gained notoriety for being the first person to be executed in the United States after the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. In 76, Gilmore committed 2 murders in Utah within a span of 2 days. He robbed and murdered a gas station attendant by shooting him, and then the next day he murdered a motel manager during another robbery. Both were students of Brigham Young University, and both had wives and infants. Gilmore's brazen and senseless crimes led to his quick arrest and trial, where he pled guilty to both murders. What was unique about this case was he actively sought the death penalty. He waived his right to appeals, expressing a desire to face the consequences of his actions. His case generated significant media attention and reignited debates about the death penalty in the United States. His chosen method of execution, a firing squad, was uncommon, and this decision was an unusual aspect of his case, as Utah allowed condemned prisoners to choose between a firing squad and lethal injection. Other reports say hanging, but this was 1976, so I don't know if that would go. He resisted efforts to appeal his death sentence, famously saying, "Just get it over with." Interestingly, his execution was delayed 3 times, and he accidentally shot himself, which was another unique aspect to the case. While Gilmore disposed of his gun that was used in the murders, he accidentally shot himself in his right hand, leaving a trail of blood behind him. There was also a witness of him hiding the gun in the bushes, and the witness heard the police scanner of the shooting, saw Gary's hand bandaged up, wrote down his license plate number, and called the authorities. And it was Gilmore's own cousin who ended up turning him in when he phoned her up to ask for bandages and painkillers for his hand. Although he was charged with the murders of both cases, only one actually brought to trial, and apparently due to lack of any witnesses. Now, he was in an apparent suicide pact with his girlfriend while in prison. On the same morning, they both overdosed on 10 to 20 pills. Others considered the pair like star-crossed lovers of Romeo and Juliet, although he left a suicide note that morning and it read, "Leave my property to my mother." This attempt actually prolonged his execution, and Gary Gilmore would have rather been executed than serve time in prison. In a letter written to his girlfriend, he talked about murder and said, "If I feel like murder, it doesn't necessarily matter who gets murdered. Don't you know that about me? Murder is just a thing of itself, a rage, and rage is not reason, so why does it matter who it vents a rage?"
I've become really realistic in the last few years and figured I'd either probably spend the rest of my life in jail or commit suicide, and or be killed by the police or something like that, violent death.
Gilmore made yet another attempt on his life and survived. Now, his murder trial was only 2 days long, and his last words before execution inspired a famous slogan, which we'll get to in a moment. But Gary Gilmore was executed by firing squad and by choice at Utah State Prison on January 17, 1977. He declared, "I'd prefer to be shot." Interestingly, this method would match his victims, making it truly an eye for an eye. His execution in 1977 was the first capital punishment carried out after the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in 1972, which temporarily suspended the death penalty. Gary Gilmore did have a last meal request before his execution. His request consisted of a hamburger, hard-boiled eggs, a baked potato, a few cups of coffee, and 3 shots of Jack Daniel's whiskey. Gary's demeanor on that day of his execution was reported to be calm and resolute. Witnesses described him as composed and seemingly at peace with his decision to face the firing squad. Present at his execution was the warden, along with corrections officers, the state medical examiner, and 4 witnesses chosen by Gary, including his uncle, a film producer, and the attorneys. His girlfriend was supposed to be a witness, but had been admitted to a mental hospital after a suicide attempt. and journalists were said to not be allowed to witness the execution and had to wait in a separate area. The witnesses were offered cotton wool as earplugs for what's to come. Now, Gilmore was transported to an abandoned cannery behind the prison, which was the prison's death house. He was already seated in the chair when the witnesses arrived and secured with nylon straps. Behind him was a curtain with 5 small holes cut out for the 5 executioners to put their rifles through to aim at him. 4 men had live rounds and 1 with a blank, so no one would know who fired the fatal shots. Gilmore was restrained and hooded, and the shots were fired from 20 feet away, aiming at his chest.
The firing squad had been chosen from the dozens of marksmen who volunteered. Each man chose an already loaded rifle. One gun held the traditional blank cartridge. The others held .30 caliber bullets.
Regarding State of Utah versus Gary Gilmore, number 6405, warrant, State of Utah to the Warden of the Utah State Prison. The Warden of the Utah State Prison is hereby ordered to execute said judgment of death on the 6th day of December 1976 at sunrise in the manner specified by law, the defendant having elected to be executed by shooting. Dated December 1st, 1976, J. Robert Bullock, Judge.
May Almighty God absolve you from your sins, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Gentlemen, ready your weapons. Aim. Fire. Secure your weapons.
And before firing, he was asked if he had any final words, and his response, "Let's do it." Notable Nike actually borrowed that slogan and changed it to "Just Do It." Gary Mark Gilmore was executed on January 17, 1977 at 8:07 a.m. in Draper, Utah. He was 36 years old. And after his execution, his brother noted 5 holes in his shirt, not 4. He was quoted in his memoir saying, "The state of Utah apparently had taken no chances on the morning that put my brother to death." After his death, he was sent for autopsy and later cremated. Gilmore had requested that his organs be donated, and within hours of his death, 2 people received his corneas. The next day, his ashes were scattered from a plane over Spanish Fork, Utah. His case was later the basis for Norman Mailer's book, The Executioner's Song, which provided a detailed account of the events leading up to Gilmore's execution. In 1982, the movie of the same title featured Tommy Lee Jones was released. The phrase Gary Gilmore's eyes was later popularized by the punk band The Adverts. The song's lyrics and title reference the idea of seeing the world through the eyes of a condemned man.
The sentence that was given to me, I've accepted sentences all my life. It seems that the people, especially the people of Utah, they want the death penalty, but they don't want executions. And when it became a reality that they might have to carry one out, well, I started backing off on it. Well, I took them literal and serious when they sentenced me to death.
In our journey of examining the final words of these notorious killers, it's important to take a moment to acknowledge and remember the victims who tragically suffered at the hands of these individuals. Not only their lives were taken, but the lives of their loved ones forever changed. The chilling moments leading up to their executions serve as a stark reminder of the true evil and the real human cost of their heinous crimes. Yet all 5 of these killers remained calm in their demeanor before their demise, even singing as if it was a final stage performance. and even giving a final FU in the process? Do they find it calming knowing that the witnesses are there, reminding them of what they did? Do they have satisfaction over it, or is it truly just the calm accepting their fate? Let me know below. Click right here to check out my other videos, and be sure to check me out on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe out there.